History feels fixed, a sequence of dates and famous names. But who wrote those pages? Kings, priests, merchants, copyists, each left a deliberate trace. Today we'll peel back who had the pen, what they chose to save, and what that means for everything we think we know about the past. When we read history, who is the we being described? When a text says, "We won a great victory," or "We suffered a terrible famine," whose voice is actually speaking? For most of human history, the records that survived were not written by soldiers, farmers, or common people. They were commissioned and preserved by a tiny literate elite courts, temples, and monasteries. These institutions had the resources, the motivation, and the power to create a version of the past that reinforced their own status, justified their policies, and cemented their place in the world. This official memory, carefully curated and passed down, has profoundly shaped our understanding of what happened. The very first archives were not public libraries. They were royal strongboxes. Kings kept the first archives because information was power. From the clay tablet repositories of ancient Mesopotamia to the parchment-filled chanceries of medieval Europe, royal scribes were tasked with documenting the machinery of the state. They recorded laws, diplomatic correspondence, royal decrees, and most importantly, the king's glorious victories. These were not neutral observers. A scribe in the court of an Egyptian pharaoh was not going to record that a battle was a humiliating draw. It would be framed as a divinely ordained triumph. These chanceries didn't just record events. They decided what was worth preserving. A record of a successful tax collection was vital. A petition from a disgruntled village was perhaps less so. The archive became a monument to the regime's success, a carefully selected highlight reel of its power and legitimacy. Long before kings centralized power, temples kept the books. In societies where literacy was rare, religious institutions were often the sole centers of record-keeping. In ancient Sumeria, temple complexes were vast economic engines, owning land, employing labor, and managing trade. Their scribes meticulously recorded every transaction on clay tablets. Bushels of grain received, jugs of beer distributed to workers, and lists of wealthy donors who contributed to the temple's upkeep. Over generations, these mundane economic records became something more. They formed an official memory of the community's piety and prosperity, overseen by the gods. These archives weren't just about accounting. They were about affirming the temple's central role in society, a role that was both spiritual and economic. The names on donor lists became the names of the righteous, their generosity immortalized in the temple's sacred history. It's a familiar saying for a reason. The victors wrote the first versions of history. When one kingdom conquered another, the first act of consolidation was often rewriting the past. In the official chronicles commissioned by the conquerors, a desperate rebellion by a subjugated people would be rebranded as treason against a rightful sovereign. The violent annexation of a neighboring territory would be described not as an invasion, but as the restoration of an ancient legitimate border. Consider the Roman accounts of their conquest of Gaul. They are told from the perspective of Roman order triumphing over barbarian chaos. The Gallic perspective is almost entirely lost, silenced by the victor's more durable narrative. The winners didn't just win the war. They won control over the story, casting their enemies as villains and themselves as the heroes of a grand historical drama. To craft these narratives, rulers employed official chroniclers who were, in essence, paid storytellers. Court historians from Sima Qian in Han China to Jan Froissart in 14th century France were tasked with creating a coherent and flattering account of their patrons' reigns. Their job was not simply to list facts, but to weave them into a compelling narrative that legitimized the ruler's authority. They would artfully blend verifiable events, battles, marriages, the construction of monuments, with tales of good omens, noble ancestry, and wise judgments. A king wasn't just a successful warlord. He was the fulfillment of a prophecy, a wise father to his people. These chronicles were powerful tools of statecraft, functioning as both historical record and sophisticated propaganda, designed to be read aloud in court to reinforce the ruler's image and ensure his legacy. Sometimes what isn't in the archive is more telling than what is. Some pages were deliberately cut from the historical record. Regimes have always understood the power of erasing inconvenient truths. When a dynasty was overthrown, the new rulers would sometimes order the destruction of records from the previous regime, a practice known as damnatio memoria in Rome. Statues were toppled, names were chiseled off monuments, and chronicles were burned or altered. A record of an embarrassing military defeat might be quietly removed from the royal library. The documents detailing a brutal purge of political rivals could be systematically destroyed. This censorship wasn't accidental. It was a conscious act of historical engineering designed to present a flawless, uninterrupted narrative of power and success. The gaps and silences in the archive are often ghosts of events that someone powerful wanted the world to forget. But not all surviving records are so grand. Beneath the sweeping narratives of kings and conquests lies a more granular layer of history. Tax rolls, land deeds, court filings, and guild minutes often give a different picture than the official chronicles. These local records, created for mundane administrative purposes, were not meant to be propaganda. A tax assessor wasn't interested in flattering the king. He needed an accurate count of households to meet his quota. A record of a land dispute between two farmers reveals details about property law, agricultural practices, and social tensions that a court historian would never mention. These documents capture the texture of everyday life, preserving the names and struggles of ordinary people who were otherwise invisible in the grand official histories. They are the quiet hum of history, buzzing beneath the loud pronouncements of the powerful. History was not always written down. In countless societies, the most important histories were oral traditions, passed from one generation to the next through epic poems, songs, and memorized accounts. These traditions preserve alternative memories, often telling the story of a community from the perspective of the governed, not the governors. They might celebrate a rebel whom the official texts call a traitor, or remember a natural disaster that the state chronicles ignored. However, because they were not fixed in text, literate elites, both ancient and modern, have often dismissed them as unreliable myths or folklore. This bias toward the written word has silenced countless histories, privileging the state-sanctioned, literate version of the past over the living memory of the people. Sometimes the most honest history is the one we can dig up from the ground. Pottery tells stories that texts ignore. Archaeology can directly contradict the claims made by elite scribes. A royal chronicle might boast of a golden age of peace and prosperity, but archaeological excavations from the same period might reveal widespread evidence of malnutrition in skeletal remains, or layers of ash indicating that a city was burned and sacked. The type and origin of pottery fragments can map trade networks that official records don't mention. The diet of common people, reconstructed from food remains, can tell us whether the prosperity claimed by the ruler was actually shared by the population. This material evidence provides a crucial, independent check on the written record, offering a voice to the voiceless masses whose daily lives were lived far from the court. Stone doesn't lie, at least not as easily as parchment does. It endures. Epigraphy, the study of inscriptions, provides another vital source of information. Public dedications on buildings, funerary inscriptions on tombstones, and boundary markers carved in rock are less easily altered or destroyed than a manuscript in a library. These inscriptions were meant for a public audience and often revealed different priorities from literary histories. While a court chronicler focused on the king's military genius, a series of inscriptions might reveal that a local governor was more concerned with building an aqueduct or paving a road. The names and occupations listed on tombstones from a Roman city give us a cross-section of its society: soldiers, merchants, craftsmen, and freed slaves people who rarely appear in the works of historians like Tacitus. Stone carries the official pronouncements and private memorials that were meant to last forever. Just as states create histories, so too do faiths. Sacred histories often serve as a form of powerful religious propaganda, recasting political events in a divine framework. In these texts, a military leader who establishes a new dynasty is not just a successful politician. He is a chosen one, divinely sanctioned to rule. The rise of a particular kingdom is interpreted as the unfolding of a sacred plan. The Hebrew Bible, for example, is not just a collection of laws and prophecies. It is a sweeping history that frames the story of the Israelite people as a covenant with God, shaping their identity and destiny. These faith-based histories are incredibly resilient, embedding themselves deeply in a culture's memory and shaping its worldview for millennia, often long after the political entities they described have vanished. While kings were busy chronicling their glory, merchants were busy tracking their profits. Trade leaves ledgers, and these commercial documents can expose economic realities that rulers tried to hide or spin. A king might claim his kingdom is flourishing, but merchant letters and shipping manifests might reveal that trade routes are dangerous, that piracy is rampant, and that certain commodities are becoming scarce. The detailed financial records of the Italian city-states or the Dutch East India Company provide an unvarnished look at the global economy, revealing the flow of silver, the price of spices, and the immense profits and risks of international trade. These documents were created for practical, not political, reasons, and their dispassionate accounting often provides a more accurate barometer of a society's health than any official proclamation. Even the maps we use are historical documents. Place names tell who ruled. Toponyms, or place names, are a living record of power and colonization. When a colonial power takes over a new territory, one of its first acts is often to rename the landscape. Mountains, rivers, and cities are given new names that honor the colonizers' rulers, saints, or hometowns, effectively erasing the indigenous names and the history they carried. The administrative priorities of a state are also baked into its maps. A map made by a military empire will prominently feature forts, roads, and strategic passes. A map made by a trading nation will highlight ports, resources, and sea routes. A map is never a purely objective representation of geography. It is an argument about who owns and controls the land. So who writes about the lives of those who aren't in power? Women, for instance, rarely authored official histories in the pre-modern world. Their experiences, beliefs, and contributions are largely absent from the chronicles of kings and battles. To reconstruct their lives, historians must turn to other sources. We find their voices in personal letters, detailing family concerns and social observations. We find their legal status defined in court records concerning marriage, inheritance, and property disputes. And we find the reality of their daily labor in the tools and domestic artifacts recovered through archaeology. Their history isn't found in a single, grand narrative, but must be pieced together from the scattered fragments they left behind in the margins of a world recorded by men. Similarly, slaves rarely authored their own histories. They left other marks. The grand annals of empires were built on the labor of millions of enslaved people whose individual stories were almost completely silenced. They do not appear in heroic chronicles except as a nameless, faceless workforce or as spoils of war. Yet, evidence of their lives persists. We can see it in the material remains of slave quarters on a Roman villa or an American plantation, in the simple pottery they used, the food they ate, and the modest personal items they managed to acquire. We occasionally hear their voices, filtered through the legal system, in court petitions for freedom or in testimony from trials. Their lives are a powerful reminder that history is not just the story of the free and the powerful, but also the story of the unfree, whose experiences must be excavated from silence. Ultimately, history was a tool of governance. States used curated versions of the past to teach loyalty, justify taxation, and manage public memory. By commissioning chronicles that emphasized a long, unbroken line of succession, a dynasty could present its rule as natural and inevitable. By celebrating past military victories against a traditional enemy, a state could rally its population for a new war. Official histories provided a shared set of stories and symbols that helped unify diverse populations under a single authority. This wasn't just about recording the past. It was about actively using the past to shape the present and control the future. The official line was amplified through the simple act of copying. Before the printing press, every book was copied by hand, and scribes were the gatekeepers who spread the official version of events. Monasteries and royal scriptoria acted as publishing houses, producing copies of approved chronicles, theological works, and legal texts. In the process of copying, a scribe might accidentally introduce errors, but they could also deliberately make changes, omitting a detail that reflected poorly on a patron, or adding a gloss that reinforced a particular political or theological point. Through this process of repetition and subtle alteration, certain versions of history became dominant, while others faded away simply because they were not copied. And just as they were written, histories get rewritten. The past is never static. It is constantly being reinterpreted to suit new political realities. A ruler once celebrated as a hero might be recast as a tyrant by a succeeding regime. An event that was once considered a glorious victory could be reframed as a tragic mistake. Each new generation and each new government looks to the past to legitimize its own existence and its own policies. The same events can be told and retold in radically different ways, depending on who is telling the story and why. History is less a fixed record and more a continuous, contested conversation. So how do modern historians unmask this bias and get closer to the truth? We use a method of cross-examination. We don't take any single text at its word. Instead, we cross-check written accounts with other forms of evidence. A chronicle's claim about a long period of prosperity can be tested against archaeological findings. The date of a building mentioned in a text can be confirmed using dendrochronology, the study of tree rings in its wooden beams. Isotope studies on human remains can reveal patterns of migration and diet that texts miss entirely. By comparing official chronicles with private letters, tax records with inscriptions, and literary accounts with material remains, historians can begin to see where the truth has been. So whose history matters? Imagine trying to reconstruct the past using only the voices of kings, generals, and officials, the people most likely to leave written records. For centuries, that is exactly how history was written. But modern historians work differently. They combine elite texts with evidence from common people, using court records, letters, tools, buildings, graves, and environmental data to build a fuller picture. Archaeology fills gaps where writing is silent. Anthropology explains everyday behavior. And material remains, pottery shards, wear marks, food waste reveal how most people actually lived. Even then, certainty is rare. Sources conflict, survive unevenly, and reflect bias. Historians don't eliminate this problem, they acknowledge it. The past is reconstructed by comparing evidence, weighing probability, and admitting what cannot be known for sure. This approach is deliberately cautious. It challenges single, authoritative narratives and asks uncomfortable questions about whose voices were preserved and whose were ignored. In doing so, it treats history not as a fixed story, but as an ongoing investigation grounded in evidence, revision, and debate. If the past speaks in many voices and some are missing, how complete can any version of history ever be? The past is not a single voice. It's a layered conversation between rulers and the ruled, stones and scrolls, spoken memories, and official files. If you want history that listens to all voices, not only the powerful ones, subscribe and we'll keep digging.